It was my third week working at the old hospital on the outskirts of town, and I had no idea what I was getting into. I thought I was prepared for anything. After all, I'd spent years in emergency rooms, hospitals, and clinics. But nothing could have prepared me for the horrors that awaited. The hospital was quiet that night, almost too quiet. The usual hum of machines was replaced by a stillness that sent an uncomfortable chill through the air. I was on the night shift, which I usually didn't mind. It was less hectic, and the hours were peaceful. The only sounds were the occasional beeping of heart monitors and the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes on the tile floor. I was sitting at the nurses' station, my shift winding down, when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the building settling, pipes creaking, or maybe some other old sound. But then the sound came again, faint whispers, just beyond the reach of my hearing, like voices floating through the air, barely audible. It was unsettling, like someone was right there with me, speaking in low tones. I looked around, but the hallways were empty. The other nurses and doctors had long gone, leaving just me and a few patients who were either asleep or in deep comas. The night seemed endless. That's when I noticed something strange. The door to the old psychiatric ward was slightly ajar. It was a part of the hospital that had been closed for years. No one ever went there, not since the fire. I remember the stories, the rumors. Some said that the fire hadn't been an accident. There were whispers about what happened to the patients who had been locked inside. But it was just a story. Right? As I walked past the door, I felt a chill down my spine. The temperature had dropped significantly, and the air grew thick, heavy. There was no reason for the door to be open. The psychiatric ward had been condemned. No one had entered in years. But the door creaked as though inviting me inside. I hesitated. I had a job to do. But something called me. Something pulled me toward that door, and against my better judgment, I pushed it open. And that's when I saw it, the unmistakable outline of a figure standing in the hallway just beyond the dim light. At first, I thought it was a patient. Maybe someone had wandered out of their room. But as I stepped closer, I realized that this wasn't a patient. It was something else entirely. The figure was tall, unnaturally tall, with long limbs that seemed to stretch too far. Its face, no, it wasn't a face, not really. It was a shadow, just a blur where eyes and a mouth should have been. I froze, not out of fear at first, but out of confusion. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. I could feel my pulse quicken, and my breath became shallow. The figure tilted its head, and in that moment, I knew, it saw me. Without a word, it began to move toward me, its steps slow and deliberate. My legs felt like lead, unable to move, unable to escape. Then the whispering came back. This time, it was louder. Clearer. Get out, get out. I could barely hear it over the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My legs finally obeyed, and I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet, crashing into the walls as I ran. But when I looked back, the figure was gone. I bolted to the nurse's station, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I tried to calm my breathing. What had just happened? What had I seen? The rational part of me told myself it was just exhaustion, maybe some late-night hallucination from the stress. But deep down, I knew. I had seen something real. Something that shouldn't have been there. I grabbed the phone, dialing the security office. But before I could speak, the lights flickered. And then I heard it again, the whisper, this time loud enough to make my blood run cold. Help me. I froze. It wasn't the voice of a patient. It wasn't a voice at all, really. It was something else, something far worse. And then, a loud bang from the direction of the psychiatric ward. I wasn't going near that door again. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My heart was racing, and my hands were still trembling as I clutched the phone in my grip. The whispering had stopped, but the weight of the silence that filled the room was suffocating. I didn't dare move. I just sat there, staring at the door to the nurse's station as though some invisible force was about to break through. The hospital was far too quiet. It was supposed to be a place of healing, of comfort, yet it felt like a tomb. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it, that everything I had seen, everything I had felt, was a result of exhaustion, stress, and the eerie quiet of the night shift. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Then I heard the footsteps. Soft at first, just a faint tap 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 against the linoleum. My blood froze. The footsteps were coming from the hallway leading toward the psychiatric ward. They weren't hurried. They weren't running or panicked, they were deliberate, slow, as though someone, or something, was taking its time. I stood up, my body stiff with fear, and inched toward the window that looked into the hall. My breath fogged the glass as I peered through it, scanning the shadows. I couldn't see anyone, not yet. But then, I saw movement. At the very end of the hall, in the dim light that barely reached the farthest corners, there was a figure. A tall, gaunt silhouette, just like the one I had seen earlier. My stomach twisted into a knot, and I stepped back, heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't the same figure, but there was something about it, something familiar. It was like it was waiting for me, watching me, just outside my view. And then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of the door to the psychiatric ward creaking open. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I had to get out of there. I had to leave before it came for me, before whatever that thing was could get any closer. But as I turned to flee, I heard a voice, an actual, human voice, calling from the hallway. Help. I froze. It was a woman's voice. Weak, strained, and desperate. It sounded like it was coming from the direction of the psychiatric ward, just beyond the door I had refused to approach. The voice was so real, so full of pain, that it pierced through the cold walls of fear that had built up around me. I felt an overwhelming urge to help, to make sure someone was okay. I had been trained to help those in need, to save lives, no matter the circumstances. But a tiny voice in my head told me it wasn't real. Still, against every instinct, I grabbed my flashlight and moved toward the door. My hand was shaking as I reached for the handle, my heart pounding as the whispering began again, distant but unmistakable. Don't go. Don't go. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe deeply as I turned the knob and stepped into the hallway. The air felt colder here, and the flickering lights overhead cast strange shadows on the walls. The sound of footsteps was louder now, closer. It was like someone, or something, was walking just behind me, never letting me get too far. I made my way down the hallway, each step feeling heavier, as though the very floor was trying to pull me back. My flashlight flickered briefly, casting brief glimpses of the worn-out walls. I could feel eyes on me. Not from anyone around me, but from the building itself. The walls were watching, listening. When I reached the door to the psychiatric ward, I hesitated. The door was slightly ajar, but it was different now. The air felt thick, suffocating, and the quiet around me seemed almost unbearable. But I had to know. I had to find out who was calling for help. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, and the air was stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. My flashlight illuminated the dusty furniture, the abandoned beds, and the peeling wallpaper. It was a ghost of a place, a forgotten part of the hospital that time had left behind. But there, at the far end of the room, I saw her. A woman, or at least, what seemed to be a woman. She was sitting in a chair, her back to me, her long, tangled hair falling over her face. She wore a hospital gown, but it was stained with something dark and ominous, something that made my skin crawl. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, as though it had been twisted. Her limbs were thin, too thin, and her skin was pale, almost translucent in the dim light. The quiet moaning that had drawn me here seemed to come from her, but it wasn't the voice of a woman in pain anymore. It was something else. A raspy, guttural sound, almost inhuman. And then, without warning, she turned her head to face me. Her eyes were wide, impossibly wide, and black, just dark voids where her pupils should have been. I felt the blood drain from my face, and the air around me seemed to crackle with a cold, oppressive force. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. She didn't move, not at first. She just stared at me, her gaze empty, hungry. The whispering came again, louder this time, coming from all directions. "You shouldn't have come." I turned and ran, not looking back. But as I fled, I could feel her presence following me, like a shadow clinging to my every step. And I knew one thing for sure. That woman was never supposed to be there. I bolted down the hall, my feet pounding against the cold, unforgiving floor. My breath was ragged, each exhale sharp in the quiet that had suddenly become suffocating. The air felt thick, like it was trying to hold me in place, to trap me. I didn't dare stop, not even to glance over my shoulder. I ran through the darkened corridors, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls, the whispers still haunting the air. There was no one in the hospital but me, but somehow, it felt like I was being watched from every corner, from every shadow. Every time I turned a corner, every time I passed an empty room, I half expected to see her, the woman with the empty eyes, waiting just out of sight, just on the edge of the darkness. I made it back to the nurse's station, locking myself inside. My hands were still shaking, my mind racing as I tried to process what I had just witnessed. The woman, her twisted body, those eyes. I had to be imagining it, right? Maybe it was some kind of hallucination, brought on by exhaustion, the stress of the night. Maybe the old hospital had some weird electromagnetic interference messing with my brain. But deep down, I knew better. There was something wrong with this place. Something had been wrong for a long time. I grabbed the phone again, my fingers trembling as I dialed the hospital security. But before I could speak, I heard it, something I hadn't heard in a while. A loud crash. Followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and far too slow. I spun around, my heart in my throat. The door to the psychiatric ward, the very same door I had left open, was now wide open, as if inviting me back inside. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't leave. I couldn't stay. In that moment, I felt like I was caught in some twisted loop, like whatever was happening in this hospital was beyond me, beyond logic. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped out into the hall again, my body trembling but my resolve growing stronger with each step. The hallway was darker than before. The flickering lights above me cast long, distorted shadows, warping the edges of the hallway like a nightmare. The air was colder, biting at my skin, and the whispers were louder now, like a chorus of voices rising from the depths. I made my way back to the psychiatric ward, my pulse racing. As I neared the door, I felt an undeniable pull, as though the very room was calling to me. It wasn't the woman's voice anymore, it was something deeper, something more ancient, like a presence that had been trapped here long before I arrived. When I stepped inside, I knew I was no longer alone. The room felt alive in a way I couldn't explain. The darkness wasn't just the absence of light, it felt dense, like it had weight. And at the far end of the room, in the corner where the woman had sat just minutes before, something moved. Something large. Something wrong. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My mind was screaming for me to run, but my body was frozen in place. It wasn't the woman anymore. It was something far worse. A figure, tall, skeletal, and cloaked in tattered rags, was standing in the corner. Its face was a blur, shifting and changing, never staying the same. One moment, it had the face of the woman I had seen earlier, and the next, it was a distorted mask of hollow eyes and twisted features. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, and its long, thin fingers twitched as though it was savoring my fear. The air grew even colder, the temperature dropping so fast I could see my breath clouding in front of me. I could feel the presence of something ancient in that room, something that had been waiting for years, maybe decades, for someone to stumble into its grasp. The figure stepped toward me, its movements fluid and unnatural, like it was floating rather than walking. I could hear its raspy breath, hear the whispering growing louder again, but it wasn't words this time. It was a sound, a noise that made my stomach churn, like the creaking of bones and the groaning of something old and dying. "Leave," it whispered. But the whisper didn't come from the figure's mouth. It came from all around me, from the walls, from the shadows themselves. I was too terrified to move. My legs wouldn't obey. I wanted to scream, to run, but all I could do was stand there, frozen in place, watching as the figure slowly came closer, its hand reaching out toward me. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the room, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps running down the hall. It was the security guard. "Hey! What are you doing in here?" he yelled, his voice shaking with fear. The figure paused, turning its head toward him, its eyes narrowing as it studied him. The guard took a step back, his flashlight trembling in his hand. And then, without warning, the figure lunged. I don't know what happened next. All I remember is a blur of movement, the sound of the guard's scream, and then the door slamming shut behind me. I ran. I ran faster than I ever had before, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away from that thing. The hospital was alive, alive in a way that shouldn't be possible. There was something in this place, something ancient, something evil. And I had just uncovered its terrible truth. As I reached the exit, I could hear the whispers again, louder this time, like 1,000 voices all speaking at once. I glanced back at the hospital, the figure in the window staring out at me. I never went back. I left the hospital that night, but the images of what I saw still haunt me. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the woman, or whatever it was, staring at me with those black, soulless eyes. The whispers followed me, curling into the corners of my mind like some kind of parasite. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when I started to learn more about what was really happening in that hospital. After a few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even at home. It was as though that place, that thing, was still following me. I couldn't just pretend it didn't happen. I had to know what I had gotten myself into. So, I went back to the hospital. I knew it was a mistake. I could feel it deep in my gut, a voice screaming at me to turn away, to forget everything I had seen. But I couldn't. I needed answers. And maybe, just maybe, there was something I could do to stop it. The hospital was closed when I arrived, officially, at least. The front doors were locked, the lights dimmed, and the only sounds that reached my ears were the wind rustling the leaves outside. But there was a back door, one that led into the staff-only areas. I had worked there long enough to know the security code and the entry points. So, I slipped in under the cover of darkness. As soon as I entered the building, the air hit me like a physical force. It was stale, thick, oppressive. The hospital had always smelled like antiseptic and bleach, but now there was a musty, decaying scent that filled the halls. I made my way through the hallways, trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I could hear faint whispers, like people talking in the distance, but no one was there. I passed by the nurses' station, the empty rooms, the cold machines that had long since stopped working. But then, I reached the psychiatric ward again. The door was wide open. I hesitated, but I knew I had to go inside. I had to know. Inside, the room was even colder than I remembered, and the shadows seemed deeper, more oppressive. As I stepped into the room, I felt a presence, something watching me, waiting. The faint whispering grew louder. I could almost make out words, but they were too distorted, too twisted to understand. That's when I saw it, on the far wall, a series of old photographs. They were yellowed and torn, hanging crookedly on the wall like they had been there for decades. I walked closer, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck rise as I studied them. The faces in the photographs were all patients, some of them I recognized from my time working there. They had all been treated in this ward, but what caught my eye was something else. The faces of the patients, their expressions, they were distorted, stretched, like they were caught in the middle of a scream or a silent cry for help. But the worst part? In every photo, there was a figure standing in the background, just out of focus, always in the shadows. A tall figure, just like the one I had seen that night. I froze. The whispers grew louder now, clearer. "Leave, before it's too late," I turned, the words ringing in my ears, and saw it again. That same figure, standing in the doorway, its black eyes staring at me, its limbs long and unnaturally thin. This time, I didn't run. Instead, I stepped closer to it, feeling an overwhelming compulsion to approach. I knew that whatever it was, it wanted me to come closer, to understand what it was that had been hiding here for so long. And then, in that moment, everything changed. I wasn't in the room anymore. I was somewhere else, somewhere dark. A vast emptiness stretched out in every direction, cold and suffocating. And the figure was there with me, its twisted form hovering just out of reach. In the distance, I saw something, flickering lights, like a hospital, like the one I had just left. But as I moved toward it, I saw the truth. It wasn't a hospital at all. It was a place where things went when they couldn't die. A place where souls were trapped, bound in agony, forever tormented by whatever force controlled this place. And I understood now. The hospital wasn't just a building. It was a prison. A place built on suffering, and everything that had ever gone wrong in that place, every death, every tortured soul, every twisted experiment, had fed into the evil that now controlled it. I understood the whispers now. They weren't just voices. They were the voices of the trapped, the lost, the forgotten. All of them begging for release. But the worst realization came when I saw the truth about the figure. It wasn't just haunting the hospital. It was a part of it. It was the very thing that had been feeding off the pain and suffering, a twisted entity born from the souls trapped there. It had been watching me, waiting for me to uncover the truth. It had known I would come back. And it wasn't going to let me leave. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The darkness around me closed in, and I felt myself being pulled back into the void, back into the depths of that cursed place. And that's when I woke up. I was back in the hospital. But something was wrong. Everything was wrong. The hallway was empty, silent. But as I looked around, I realized. I wasn't alone. The whispers were still there, just beneath the surface, growing louder. And I knew. I had never left. The figure was still here. And it was coming for me. I don't know if he'll make it out alive. But if you're reading this, and you find yourself in that hospital, don't go near the psychiatric ward. Don't go anywhere near that door. Because once you do, once you step into the darkness, there's no way out. I'll pray you never make the mistake I did. I thought I had escaped. I thought I had outrun whatever it was that haunted that hospital, that twisted place where the past and the present merged in a nightmare of eternal suffering. But now, as I sit here, writing this, I realize how wrong I was. I didn't escape. I never did. The moment I thought I had left, the moment I convinced myself that I was safe, I was already back in its grip. It was as if the hospital had swallowed me whole, trapping me within its cursed walls. And now, every night, I relive the same nightmare, the same feeling of being hunted, being watched, being pulled back into the darkness. I've tried everything to break free. I've seen doctors, I've tried therapy, even medications. But nothing works. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there, in that hallway, in that room where the figure waits for me. The whispers have never stopped. They're always in my ears, just beyond my comprehension, pulling at the edges of my mind. But the worst part? The worst part is that I know now, deep down, that I'm not alone in this. I've been talking to other former employees from the hospital, trying to make sense of what happened. And I've found something chilling: they've all had the same experience. Everyone who's worked there, anyone who's been in that psychiatric ward, has felt it. The presence. The watching. The whispers. And the worst part? No one remembers exactly what happened when they were in that room. It's like the hospital takes a part of you, a piece of your mind, each time. Like it erases the memory of what happens after you cross that threshold. I don't know if it's some sort of collective madness, some twisted psychological effect of the hospital's trauma. But I've started to think it's something much darker, something far worse. They say the psychiatric ward was closed after the fire. They say that the building is condemned and that it's been abandoned for years. But I know the truth. I've seen it with my own eyes. The ward isn't abandoned. It never was. It's still there. The truth is worse than I could ever have imagined. I thought the hospital had been a place of care, a place of healing. But it was never that. It was a place for something else, something ancient, something far more powerful than any of us could understand. It had been hiding in plain sight, feeding on the souls of the lost, growing stronger with every death, every suffering. And now, it has me. The whispers have become clearer. They aren't just voices anymore. They're becoming commands, demands. They want me to go back. They want me to open the doors again. But I can't. I won't. The figure has started to appear more and more. At first, it was just a fleeting shadow, just a glimpse out of the corner of my eye. But now, it's with me all the time. It watches me from the reflection in the mirror, from the windows, from the corners of the room. I can feel it lurking just behind me, waiting for the moment I slip up, the moment I let my guard down. I thought I could fight it. I thought I could outrun it. But I was wrong. Every time I try to live a normal life, it pulls me back in. Every time I think I've escaped, I see the shadows in the corner of my vision, feel the chill of the air, hear the whispers that beckon me toward the dark. It's an endless cycle. And now I know. It wasn't the hospital that was haunted. It was me. The figure has been following me, not just through the halls of that cursed place, but through every waking moment since I first laid eyes on it. It has embedded itself into my soul, a parasite that refuses to let go. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. It's only a matter of time before it drags me back into the darkness, back to where I began. If you're reading this, if you found this journal, don't make the same mistake I did. Don't go looking for answers. Don't seek the truth in that place. Because once you do, there's no escape. The hospital isn't just a building. It's a prison. And the only way out is to never enter. But it's already too late for me. And it will be too late for you, too, if you make the mistake of thinking it's just a story. If you ever hear the whispers calling you, don't answer. Because it's waiting. It's always waiting. I don't know how much time has passed since I last wrote in this journal. Days, weeks, maybe even months, everything blurs together now. The memories of the hospital, of the figure, of the whispers, they're all tangled in my mind, like a nightmare that refuses to end. And the more I try to escape it, the more I realize how much I've already lost. It's taken everything from me, my peace, my sanity, my will to fight. It's worse than I ever imagined. The longer I stay away from that place, the harder it becomes to distinguish between what's real and what's not. The whispers are constant now, echoing in the back of my mind. Every room feels like it's closing in on me. I can't escape the feeling that I'm being followed, watched, hunted. But something has changed. The figure, it's not just lurking in the shadows anymore. It's not just haunting my dreams. It's here, in my house. It comes in the dead of night. I wake up, feeling its presence in the room, its coldness wrapping around me like a vice. I've seen it in the corner of my room, standing just out of my reach, watching me with those dark, hollow eyes. I can feel its breath on my skin, cold and suffocating. I know it's waiting for me to make a mistake. To be weak. To give in. And I think I finally have. I'm writing this because I have nowhere else to turn. I have to finish this. I have to end it, one way or another. I've made the decision to go back to the hospital. I don't know if I'm doing this for answers or if I'm just hoping that maybe, somehow, I can put an end to this once and for all. I don't know if I'll survive, but I can't keep running. I can't keep pretending that this will just go away. The hospital is calling me back. The whispers are getting louder, more insistent. It wants me to return. It needs me to return. I've gathered what little courage I have left, and I'm heading back to where it all began. The figure has been getting closer, more tangible with every passing day. It's become a part of me, feeding off my fear, feeding off my desperation. I can feel it inside my chest now, in my lungs, in my bones. It's in my blood, and I know that if I don't face it, if I don't confront it one last time, it will consume me completely. I don't know what I'll find when I get there. I don't know if I'll ever make it out alive. But I'm going to try. I have to. Maybe I'll find the answers I've been looking for. Maybe I'll understand why it chose me, why it's been following me, why it won't let go. Or maybe I'll just become another lost soul, trapped in that dark place forever. The hospital isn't a place for healing. It's a place for forgetting. A place where the line between life and death doesn't exist anymore. It's a place where souls are bound, imprisoned in a perpetual state of suffering, waiting for someone, anyone, to come and set them free. But I'm not sure that's even possible anymore. Maybe the real horror is that the hospital has never been empty. It's never truly been abandoned. It's always been there, lurking, feeding on the memories of the lost, and waiting for someone to come back. And now, I'm that someone. The figure wants me. It's been waiting for me all this time, and now, it's close. So close. I can feel it pressing against the edges of my mind, its cold fingers brushing against my thoughts, pulling me in. I don't know how I'm supposed to fight it. I don't know if I even can. But I'm going back. I have no choice. I need to end this. I need to face whatever it is that's been hunting me, that's been inside me for so long. And maybe, just maybe, when I walk through those doors again, I'll find the answers. Or maybe I'll finally be free. But if I don't come back, if I don't finish this story, then you'll know what happened. You'll know that I wasn't strong enough. You'll know that the hospital got me. And I'm sorry. But if you ever hear the whispers, if you feel the cold air on the back of your neck, if you feel the figure watching you from the shadows, don't go to that hospital. Don't go near that place. Because once you do, once you step foot inside, there's no coming back. And you'll become just like me, just another lost soul, trapped forever in the darkness. I made it back. I don't know how. I don't know why, but I'm here. I'm standing in front of the hospital once more, the place I thought I had escaped. The place that has haunted me, that has twisted everything I knew about reality and stripped me of my sanity. It's night again. The air is thick, heavy with the same oppressive silence I felt before. The same stillness that lingers like a predator, waiting. I feel it now, even more than before. The weight of it. The building itself feels alive, breathing in time with me, watching me as I stand here. I'm not sure what I'm hoping to find, closure, answers, maybe even freedom, but something deep inside tells me this will be my final journey. I know this is my last chance. I know it won't end until I face whatever is here. Whatever is waiting for me. As I cross the threshold of the front doors, I can't help but feel a cold hand grip my chest. It's as if the very air is pressing against me, suffocating me. The whispers have been constant ever since I arrived, crawling through the cracks of my mind, 1,000 voices all calling my name. Some of them are familiar, but most of them, they sound like the people who used to work here. The ones who disappeared. I know what I have to do now. I walk through the empty hallways again, feeling that familiar chill, the one that's always followed me. The figure hasn't shown itself yet, but I can sense it. I know it's here, waiting. The farther I walk into the hospital, the more it feels like the walls are closing in, the darkness wrapping around me tighter with each step. The whispers are growing louder. I pass the nurse's station. It's exactly how I remember it, silent, desolate. Nothing alive, nothing moving. But as I continue deeper into the bowels of this forsaken place, the air shifts. The temperature drops. I reach the hallway that leads to the psychiatric ward. And the door is open again. It always leads me here. Every time I think I've escaped, every time I think I've outrun it, I end up back in the same place. The whispers stop. The silence is deafening now, so thick it feels like a physical presence. I step through the door, past the flickering lights that cast strange shadows against the peeling wallpaper. My pulse is in my throat. I feel the figure's eyes on me, its presence stronger now. It's not just in the shadows anymore. It's in me. I finally stop, standing in the middle of the room. It's like I've stepped into a nightmare, a place frozen in time, a room that hasn't changed in years. But now, something is different. Something is wrong. There are no photos on the walls, no evidence of the patients who once filled this space. The room feels empty. Hollow. As though everything here has been drained. That's when I hear it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from behind me. I turn around, but there's nothing there. Nothing, except for a shadow. A figure in the far corner, tall and skeletal, its limbs unnaturally long. Its face is still a blur, shifting and twisting, but this time, it's not just a blur. It's starting to form. I see flashes of the woman I encountered before, the woman with the black eyes, and then something else. Something worse. A smile. A twisted, grotesque smile, stretching across its face. Its mouth widens impossibly, and I can feel the air grow even colder as it steps closer, the sound of its footsteps echoing louder in my ears. "You came back," it says, its voice a low, guttural rasp that feels like it's scraping against my skull. I should run. I know I should. But I can't move. I can't speak. My feet are frozen to the floor, my heart hammering in my chest. "You shouldn't have come," it whispers, its voice now in my ear, its cold breath brushing against my neck. "Now you're mine. You've always been mine." The figure steps forward again, its hand reaching out toward me, and in that moment, I know. I know that it's not just the hospital that has been feeding on my fear all this time. It's been feeding on me, on my very soul, growing stronger with every step I took into this place. It's a part of me now. And I'm a part of it. I try to scream, but no sound comes. The figure wraps its cold fingers around my wrist, pulling me toward the darkness at the far end of the room. I struggle, but it's useless. Its grip tightens, and I feel myself being dragged deeper into the void, the whispers growing louder. It's here. I can feel it. I can see it now, more clearly than ever before. The figure, the woman, the darkness, it was never a separate thing. It was never a single entity. It was a part of the hospital. It was the hospital itself. The pain, the suffering, the twisted souls, it's all one entity, bound together in an endless cycle. And now, it has me. The hospital isn't just a place. It's a prison, a living thing that devours those who wander too close. And I was never meant to leave. As I am pulled further into the abyss, I realize the truth that I've been running from all along. I am now part of the hospital, part of its curse. There's no escaping it. I'm trapped here, like all the others before me. The whispers will never stop. The figure will always be waiting. And the cycle will continue, feeding on the lost souls, one by one. I'm sorry. I wish I could have saved you from this. But if you ever hear the whispers calling your name, don't answer. Because once you do, you'll be just like me. And you'll never escape.